Here we go.
I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati.
Hello, hello. Happy hump day. It's hump day. What's going on, guys? Welcome to Sabby Sabs podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. If you are new, I want to let you know that Sabby Sabs podcast is a part of Revolutionary Blackout Network. You can catch me there on Thursdays for the Roundtable and Friday for the Sabby Show. And you can catch me here Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. Greetings. Shout out to everyone watching on YouTube, Rockfin, and Twitter. All right, I want to give shout outs to people in the chat really quick. What's going on? Dan O'Neill says Anna is better than you. Oh. Shout out to Sing at Night says good vibes. Greetings, Eric T. Red, who's a Sabby member, says live show is at 8 p.m. Caleb Maupin is at 9. Yes, that's why I'm starting an hour later tonight because Caleb is coming on at 9 o'clock. So I'll do my news stories first, and then Caleb will pop on to talk about the Ukraine and Russia crisis. What's going on? Sean M says, what up on Happy Hump Day, Ash Wednesday? What's up? Shout out to Hannah G says Sabby with a smiley face. Greetings, Saul says, thanks, Doc. The commenter said, not in the next comment about, oh, not. That's funny. Shout out to Little Rock Elevator said, I should have Sabby's opening theme as my ringtone. Oh, that is a good idea. That's a good idea. Shout out to Zach Davis says, yeah, Turk's gonna Turk. Oh God, Zach, cringe. Shout out to Flash Flood Area 3 says, it's great. Eric, greetings, Bovis son sends 3 hearts. What's going on, Notori sends a lot of hearts. Shout out to Restless Native says, bless up Sabby and chat. Greetings, Where Pilgrim says, man, Cabe looks going through it lately. Yes, he is. He is. What's going on, Leroy, who's a Sabby member, says, peace. Shout out to Miguel, who also says, peace. All right, it's peaceful night. Peaceful night. What's going on? Ashura says, hey, Sabby, what's up? What is up, Ashura? Hey, Ashura, I know you had a birthday recently. My birthday is next week. That's right. It's almost Pisces season. Shout out to Saul says yes. And greetings to Gamer for Life says hello. What's going on? A tree says the Humpty Dance Digital Underground. I love that song. For those who don't know, it's a really cool song. Tupac was a part of Digital Underground before he was solo. Some people don't know that. So just wanted to put that out there. Really quick, I want to shout out everyone who is a Sabby patron. Thank you so much. I really appreciate all of your support. Their names are listed here. You can see all of the Sabby patrons. And quick shout out to Ricky Burns, Kasim Baker, and Francisco Garcia for becoming new Sabby patrons. If you are interested, you can become one as well. I have 4 categories: members, Sabbies, Sabsters, and the ultimate. All right, what are we going to talk about tonight? We have some interesting stories that I can't wait to get into. So let me go ahead and share my thumbnail here. Tonight, we are talking about TYT smears Aaron Mate again. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, they are after him again. They didn't learn anything from last year. We're also going to talk about Rashida Tlaib's horrible speech. What was that all about last night? That was cringe. Oh, God. And we're going to talk about Caleb Maupin joins. He's going to come on to talk about the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And I'm sure he will have a lot to say. So stay tuned for that. So shout out really quick to Arthur for the super chat. Anna can hold a candle to our Sabby. Oh, that's really sweet. Thanks so much, Arthur Handy. That's sweet. Is Handy really your last name? I'm curious. I'm curious. All right. The first story that I want to get into, this is actually a shout out to a direct action that is happening this weekend. For those of you who are in Massachusetts, like me, this is something that you can check out. This is being put on by Mass Peace Action. Massachusetts Peace Action is having an event this Sunday. It's called Stop the War in Ukraine. Russian troops out. No to NATO expansion. Join our global day of action Sunday, March 6th, peaceinukraine.org. Stop the war in Ukraine. Russian troops out. No NATO expansion. And this is happening again this Sunday. This will take place at the Massachusetts State House steps. So that's actually really easy to find. Just go to the Boston Common. There's a big gold dome on top of a brick building. That is the Massachusetts State House, and that is where this is going to be happening. This is at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So who is going to be there? This is organized by Code Pink, Stop the War Coalition, the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, and the No to NATO Network. So definitely check that out. I will put the link in the chat for those of you who are able to attend. So let me go ahead and put that here. All right. And let's go ahead and get into tonight's stories. So I actually want to start with Rashida Tlaib's horrible speech last night. That was awful. I don't know if you guys got to see all of the State of the Union address and the responses after, but it may be more comical if you watch it on Revolutionary Blackout Network. We did a live stream about it last night while it was live. So I think you might enjoy that. So definitely check that out. And we talked about her response as well. Now, before I get into her video, I want to talk about something that Biden mentioned during the State of the Union address, where he was basically saying the quiet part out loud. And this is another reason why I tell you that Democrats and Republicans, they're pretty much the same. They both are corporate and they both fund the police state. He said this message last night, and he is really getting pulled through the coals on Twitter today. People are not happy. A lot of Black people are not happy about this comment that he made. So listen to this. I'm going to share this clip here. And then I'm going to go into Rashida Tlaib's response, because after you hear him say this, you'll understand why her response to me was so weak. Here we go.
Let's come together and protect our communities, restore trust, and hold law enforcement accountable. That's why the Justice Department has required body cameras, banned chokeholds, and restricted no-knock warrants for its officers.
Got to pause right there just for a second. So he mentions that the Justice Department has issued body cameras. We know they've had body cameras for a while. That really doesn't make that much of a difference because police officers have been known to turn them off. He also mentions banning no-knock warrants and the chokeholds. And it was just a couple weeks ago that Amir Locke was killed because of a no-knock warrant. So these little steps of reform aren't actually making a difference. That is the problem. And Joe Biden knows that. Listen to what else he says. This is really bad. I'm just going to warn you, this is bad.
That's why the American Rescue Plan that you all provided $350 billion that cities, states, and counties can use to hire more police, invest in more proven strategies. Proven strategies like community violence interruption, trusted messengers, breaking the cycle of violence and trauma, and giving young people some hope. We should all agree the answer is not to defund the police, it's to fund the police. Fund them. Fund them.
Did everybody hear what he just said? The answer is not to defund the police. The answer is to fund the police. And he said it multiple times. Listen to what he says again and listen to what he says right before that.
Giving young people some hope. We should all agree the answer is that messengers breaking the cycle of violence and trauma, giving young people some hope.
That part right there. Breaking the silence of violence and trauma and giving young people some hope. A lot of times, police are a part of the cycle of violence and trauma. They show up to situations and they escalate these situations. They make things worse. Do you know how many people I have met throughout the years that have been traumatized because of their experiences that they've had with the law enforcement in this country? How they patrol their neighborhoods, how they've seen their friends assaulted by the police, how they've seen their friends killed by police officers. The violence that he speaks of, he's talking about criminals. He's not talking about the violence that's also committed by law enforcement, which they are usually not reprimanded for. Let's go back in.
We should all agree the answer is not to defund the police. It's to fund the police. Fund them.
And look at the cop and Nancy Pelosi standing up right behind him. This is what we put into office, ladies and gentlemen. We put in a cop, Kamala, Nancy Pelosi, who is known for taking big pharma money and a lot of big corporate money. And we put in Crime Bill Joe. And somewhere along the way, people expected Joe Biden to actually implement policies that would make it harder for police to do these crimes. You put in Crime Bill Joe and Kamala. You have an administration that is keen on funding the police. He just said the quiet part out loud. We don't need to defund the police. We need to fund them, fund them. I didn't hear him say anything about funding those poor communities. I didn't hear anything in this whole speech about any type of Black agenda. Nothing about canceling student loans. No universal health care. He focused more so on the conflict in Russia and Ukraine and funding the police and his crappy Build Back Better plan. Let's go back in.
Fund them. Fund them with resources and training. Resources and training they need to protect our communities.
That's another problem right there. He says fund them with resources and training. How about you fund those poor communities with resources? How about that? You see, they like to talk about the crime issue, but they don't want to talk about the reason why you have the crime issue, which is poverty. Most crime is linked to poverty. Why not fix the poverty situation so that you can fix the crime situation? They don't want to do that. They want to help the police. They want to ramp up and amplify the police state. That's what they want to do. They don't want to help the people in those communities. Do you see this? And all those people who stood up and cheered and clapped. How many young people were in that room? Not many. Not many. This is who is running our country. I'll go back in and then I'm going to go to her video.
I ask Democrats and Republicans alike to pass my budget and keep our neighborhoods safe. And we'll do everything in my power to crack down on gun trafficking of ghost guns that you can buy online, assemble at home. no serial numbers, can't be traced. I asked Congress to pass proven measures to reduce gun violence, pass universal background checks. Why should anyone on the terrorist list be able to purchase a weapon? Why? Why? And folks, ban assault weapons with high-capacity magazines hold up to 100 rounds. You think the deer are wearing Kevlar vests? Look, repeal the liability shield. It makes gun manufacturers the only industry in America that can't be sued. The only one.
So I'm not going to go into too much more of that. I can only take so much of him, and that address was cringe. But again, he's focusing on the wrong issues. And this is what a lot of politicians in DC do. They're not really focusing on the poverty issue. And the ones that are, they're pretty much silenced or they're pushed out. It goes back to poverty. Now, Rashida Tlaib issued a response to this. And I'm going to tell you right now,
to deliver.
I don't know who this woman is in this video, but this woman must be a clone. I have never heard Rashida Tlaib speak this way before in my life. I've never heard her speak this way. She was too calm. This almost came across like some type of Save the Children infomercial. Listen to what she says, because I'm about to pick this apart. Listen to this.
Dies. We'd stand up to big pharma and insurance companies, and we'd make drug prices for life-saving medicine like insulin actually affordable. And we'd make abortion care a fundamental right so that no Supreme Court could ever take it away. We'd pass the End Child Poverty Act that Representative Mondaire Jones and I introduced so that parents like India Beckham and millions more could provide for the basics that every child needs to thrive. We'd fight together for respect for all of our workers. That means a minimum wage of at least $15 an hour that rises with inflation, the freedom to join a union without harassment or intimidation, and paid and family medical leave for our workers. From the baristas at home, in my home community in Great Lakes Coffee, to the teachers in Minnesota, to the Amazon workers in Alabama.
This speech is so watered down. What happened to the Rashida Tlaib that stood up in front of everyone and said, we're going to impeach him? What happened to that Rashida Tlaib? The woman that had all that fire and all that power. This is what she sounds like now. She's been watered down. We've already seen this happen to Nina Turner in her recent ad. AOC is doing this as well. They've been co-opted. Their whole message has changed. Their attitude has changed. This is exactly why I keep telling you, putting these progressives through, it doesn't work. Because they're not going to change the party. The party's going to change them, or they're going to tell them to get out. Listen to how she's talking. Why are you calm? During a time in this country where so many people have been unhoused, so many people have lost their jobs, we have this pandemic, people don't have a living wage, we still don't have health care for everyone in this country. How can you be this calm? Really? Let's go back in. Listen to the rest of this. This is really bad.
Workers are speaking up for a voice and dignity on the job. I saw what a union meant for my family growing up, as my father was a member of the United Auto Workers. This smile is because of the UAW. They ensured that our family had access to dental care. So this is our time. This is our time to take on corporate polluters who get rich poisoning us, and we fight for environmental justice.
Yeah. So here's the funny thing about that. Get rid of rich polluters or rich people who poison us. Joe Biden's one of those people. Like, really? Really? Joe Biden still supports fracking. You don't think that causes pollution? You don't think that harms the environment? Are you going to get rid of him too, Rashida? No, she's going to go on to praise him. Watch this.
With the Green New Deal, we rebuild our country by creating millions of union jobs in the clean energy industry of the future.
This is my pet peeve about this. Not everyone is a part of a union. They talk about this as if everyone has an opportunity to be a part of a union. You don't. I've never been a part of a union, and I've been working since I was 16. So no, they talk about this as that this is going to apply to everybody. It doesn't apply to everybody. That's the problem.
Imagine turning the Rust Belt into a green belt that is a center of American jobs and innovation for the next century. And we'd ensure clean air and water, because I know we can't build back better if our children can't live healthy lives. A working family's majority would take on skyrocketing housing costs, which have left 500,000 Americans homeless on any given night, and millions more struggling to pay the rent. That means building millions of accessible, new, affordable homes, and providing long overdue rental, down payment, and home repair assistance. We would provide a real path to citizenship for our people who want nothing more than to contribute to our nation. We would transform our broken immigration system into one where immigrants are welcomed, not vilified.
That's Kamala Harris's job. Wasn't Kamala Harris put in charge of immigration? Has the situation with immigration in this country improved? No, kids are still in cages. The border is still an issue. That's Kamala Harris's job. Just wanted to point that out. Just wanted to point that out.
Over the past few days, we have all watched in horror as Russia launched an illegal and unjustifiable invasion of Ukraine. We stand with the people of Ukraine. The United States and our allies must work together towards an immediate ceasefire and a diplomatic resolution to help save lives.
What about saving lives right here in the United States? Do you stand with the people in Somalia? Do you stand with the people in Yemen? Oh no, they don't even talk about it. They don't even talk about it. It's all about Ukraine. What about all those other people? Joe Biden just bombed Somalia last week. Do you stand with them? I didn't see those flags at the State of the Union address. All those people that had the Ukraine flags, where were the flags for Somalia? I didn't see any of those. Do you stand with them, Rashida? Or do you only stand with the countries that you're told to stand with? I think we all know the answer. It is abysmal that they are sitting here and they are pretending like it's not even happening. It is disgusting the way they are treating brown people abroad, the way they are ignoring what is happening right now in those countries. And their sole focus is on what's going on with Ukraine and Russia. I've said this before, I'll say it again. People don't care about brown people far away. Hell, people don't care about brown people right here. So all of these people who have come forward in DC, we stand with Ukraine. We stand with the people of Ukraine. And I can't wait till Caleb comes on to talk about that. All this gusto. Let's stand up for them. They don't even want to stand up for people in our own country. They don't want to stand up for brown people. They're not standing up for people in Haiti, that's for damn sure, after they've ruined their country. Pay attention to that, you guys. Pay attention to the optics and the propaganda.
We must pursue targeted sanctions that put pressure on Russia's billionaires, not the everyday Russians who have no choice in this conflict and are courageously protesting the war as we speak. We need a humanitarian response to this crisis. We must welcome Ukrainian refugees from all walks of life to the United States. And I know we can't seek peace by continuing to spend $750 billion every year on weapons of war, making defense contractors and companies wealthier. We must put human rights and dignity first and prioritize cooperation and diplomacy.
Now, this is a gotcha moment. How is she going to say that we must fight back against the military-industrial complex when we are bombing people in Somalia? Which she will not mention in this speech, by the way. Which Joe Biden did not mention in his speech, by the way. So which is it, Rashida? Is it just select countries that you're supposed to care about?
To address the challenges that no one nation can confront alone, like pandemics and climate change. Nothing is more important than keeping the people we love free from harm. We all deserve to be safe in our neighborhoods. The path to community safety is investing in what people need to thrive, like access to jobs, quality education, and real opportunities. We can't police away homelessness, poverty, or mental health crises in our country. Care, not more criminalization, is how we ensure lasting safety for all.
No, it is not. This is the most milquetoast speech if I've ever heard one. Care is not going to help people get out of poverty. Let's just be real. Care, you can care about someone, but if they're poor, they're still poor. And Rashida knows that. She represents Detroit. Give me a break. Care is what's going to help those people. What will help them is giving housing to everyone, having rent control, having a living wage. Forget the minimum wage. Give people a living wage. Give everybody health care in this country. That is what is going to help those people, not because you care about them.
And we should end the war on drugs, fund legal defense, and enact criminal justice reforms like ending qualified immunity that would transform our discriminatory legal system. And we should add.
What happened to defund the police? You see how she switched up? What happened to defund the police? Now it's, well, we should end qualified immunity, increase criminal justice reforms. We already have reforms. Body cam is a part of reforms. What happened to defund the police, Rashida? See, you guys see what's happening? Same thing with Medicare for all. They don't even say that anymore. Now they're saying access to health care. The Democratic Party has co-opted progressive issues and they have watered them down. And I mentioned this last night, and Rashida is a perfect example. This is ridiculous.
Out of justice for working people to the Supreme Court by confirming Ketanji Brown Jackson without delay. Over the last 2 years, the richest people in America doubled their wealth. As profits skyrocket, corporations have the nerve to blame inflation while increasing prices on essential goods and services. This is more than simply corporate greed. It's extortion. We need to tax billionaires and mega corporations that dodge their fair share. And we need to fight back against unchecked corporate power that increasingly shape our lives. Those policies I named, they are popular.
Can't do that if you're in a corporate party. Just saying. Can't do that if you're in a corporate party.
But we have a system that makes it too easy for elected officials to answer to donors instead of their constituents. Disproportionate representation in the Senate distorts the democratic will of the people. The filibuster, a tool perfected to defend Jim Crow, continues to be used to block progress. We must abolish it in the Senate, like the House did more than a century ago. Republicans are trying to destroy our political power of working class families, and they're willing.
And so are Democrats. And now she's taking the liberal approach. Let's blame the Republicans. It's their fault. They're the ones who are trying to destroy working class families. Really, Rashida? So is the Democratic Party. Let's be real here. Your party didn't even want to give the American people a $15 minimum wage. I'm sure that hurt working families. And by the way, this is being hosted by the Working Families Party. They take corporate money too. I did a stream about that a while back. They take corporate money too. And Christina Livio called out the Working Families Party, how they also push and endorse establishment Democrat candidates.
Willing to tear down our democracy to do it. They say the violent insurrection on January 6th is, quote, legitimate political expression, and that corporate super PAC spending dominating our elections is just free speech. The Republicans act like the real danger to our democracy is having enough voting booths in Black neighborhoods, mail-in ballots, fair district lines. If we really want a democracy that responds to the will of the people, then we need voting rights protection and democracy reforms immediately.
She wants you to have those voting rights protections so that you can vote for Democrats. That's what that's about. She doesn't want you to have those protections so you can vote for independent candidates or third-party candidates. It's to vote for her party. That is why she's going to blame the Republicans. See how this works?
While we continue building support in Congress, President Biden can use his executive power now to take action, to deliver for the people. He can cancel federal student loan debt, which would be a lifeline for millions of Americans and a transformative economic stimulus. And he can ban federal fossil fuel leasing, drilling, direct federal agencies to reject permits for new fossil fuel projects, and regulate carbon emissions. He can fix our labor rules right now to allow more workers to access overtime pay. And he can change how we calculate the poverty line so that more Americans become eligible for life-saving federal benefits. And he can take action to break up pharmaceutical monopolies that make life-saving medicines affordable. The midterm elections are coming up fast, and this year we can elect working families majority we all need.
What did I tell you? That's what this is about. That's why this is being put on by the Working Families Party, because she wants you to vote for those candidates. And I already told you, some of them are establishment Democrats. That's what this is all about. You guys see how this works now? That's why they are putting on this speech. That's why they are representing it. That's the whole goal. Everything she is saying here, we already know. Those of us who've been paying attention, we know this. We know what Joe Biden can do. Why are you repeating these same talking points? We already know that. How are you going to mention Joe Biden can stop fracking in the same speech where you said that we're doing great things in terms of climate reform? How can you put those two together? It just... I'm going to go back in. There's something else. Hold on one second.
We know what happens when the Republicans take power. They protect the rich, target the rest of us.
Is she serious right now? Is she serious right now? We know what happens when the Republicans take power. They protect the rich. So do the Democrats. Joe Biden is protecting the rich. Nancy Pelosi protects the rich. The entire Democratic Party protects the rich. How can you sit up here and give this speech and make it seem like it's just one party that is doing this when you know damn well that it's both parties? You seem to know it was both parties when you were running for office. Now, all of a sudden, because she's a part of the Democratic Party, she's just only going to blame the right. These are the progressives that we put into Congress. They don't even seem like the same people that they were 2 years ago.
They attack and undermine voting rights, women's rights, workers' rights, immigrants, people of color, and our LGBTQ community.
So do Democrats. So do Democrats. Democrats do the same thing. Are you kidding me? After Joe Biden just said he's going to fund the police more, get out of here.
And they block progress on climate change. So if you voted or not.
So again, in the same speech, how are you going to say that it's the Republicans' fault when you just mentioned right before this, she's talking about climate change. She just mentioned that Joe Biden can stop fracking. And then right after that, she says the Republicans, they block progress on climate change. Boo, you just said that Joe Biden can stop fracking. He's a Democrat.
Knocked on doors or donated in 2020 to defeat Trump, I implore you, pay attention, because this year is just as important and we need everybody to help. Blocking the far right is just not enough. We also need to elect the next generation of working families champions. It starts with staying engaged and voting in every election and every primary for candidates who will put working people first. I know that we can get closer to the world we all deserve when we build a bigger movement. Bring people in, not cast them out. I was taught by a pastor in Detroit that we aren't a country that is different to deliver for you and your family. We guarantee healthcare as a basic right because after 2 years of this pandemic, we can't allow corporate profits to determine who lives and who dies to deliver for you and your family. We guarantee healthcare as a basic right.
Did you hear what she just said? We guarantee healthcare as a basic right. Did I miss something? When did they guarantee healthcare as a basic right? When did that happen? Anybody? Anyone? Even Joe Biden doesn't want everyone to have healthcare. He's been vocal about that. She started lying at the very beginning. We guarantee healthcare as a basic right. No, you don't. That's the problem. Let me come out of the speech. I need to get going into my next story. I don't know who that woman was, but that is not the Rashida Tlaib that I knew a couple years ago. No way you can be that calm in that speech. It's really interesting to me. When Trump was in office, Bernie Sanders gave a fiery rebuttal. But see, now, if you're giving a rebuttal against your own party, it has to be a sweet, soft speech like what she just gave. That speech does not make me feel empowered. It doesn't make me feel inspired. It comes across as milquetoast, and it damn sure does not make me want to go out and vote for Democrats. What the hell was that? We've guaranteed healthcare as a basic right. Who are you? Why are you talking like that? See how radical some of these progressives were when Trump was in office versus how they are now? We still have the same problems. The issues are still present. But because it's their party that is in charge, they have taken a back seat. I'm going to go to these super chats and I want to get to my next story. Thank you so much for the super chat, Alexander. I'm feeling better after blocking MSM a year ago. Shout out, Alex. Shout out. Thank you so much for the super chat, Lee NYC. Thank you, Sabby, for thoroughly depressing me. I'm so sorry. Got to create a presence in all communities, in all states to create the movement that keeps Squad true. Thank you so much for those. I want to go ahead and take that. Yeah, I'll take that comment. Thanks so much for the tip on Rockfin, Roger Meadows. Quick, get her out of there. Someone rescue her. She is under duress. Hostage video. Zoom out. You'll probably see the bang bang next to her head with Pelosi henchmen at the other end. Thank you so much for that tip, Roger. I swear to you, that does not seem like the same person. Phenomenal Mysticism says Rashida Tlaib and the rest of the fraud squad are pseudo activists. Guys, she represents Detroit, a city that has a high poverty rate, a high crime rate. That's how you come out. You make this big announcement. I'm going to make this response speech. And that's the speech that you gave. That was so weak. So weak. All right, let's go ahead and get into our next story. Now, this is about TYT smearing Aaron Mate. So yes, ladies and gentlemen, they have done it again. You thought they would have learned from last year, but they have not. So before I get into the new current smear, I want to remind you of what happened last year, what started all of this. And again, they have not learned from it. So last year, they decided to smear Aaron Mate about his coverage in Syria. So I want to remind you of this video in particular. Anna Kasparian was very unprofessional with this. So this was from Aaron Mate in this insane libelous clip. Jink Uger and Anna Kasparian say that I am paid by the Russians, seem to be working for dictators, and deny chemical attacks on Syrian children. I don't care about their disdain for me, but I do care about being smeared. Now, let's remember, this goes all the way back to May 27, 2021. So let me go ahead and play this video for you as a reminder, because they have not stopped doing this. They are back at it again. And they're so quick to call people like a Russian asset or to say you're paid by Russians. This is what they do. They're no better than MSNBC. Here we go.
They said Aaron Mate yelled at me. And so
Aaron Mate lied. Aaron Mate. Everyone cares what Aaron Mate has to say, right?
Okay.
The guy who denies that Syrian children were killed with chemical attacks. Yeah.
And
Fuck
gets
Aaron
paid by
Mate.
the.
Yeah, fuck you.
Gets
Anyway,
paid
let's
by the
move on.
Russians.
Let's end the freaking pod. I can't.
Okay, see, that's what happens.
I can't stand.
just
I
saw
can't
it.
stand that guy, and I can't stand the very intentional disinformation they put out there in regard to disgusting dictators around the world.
Quick, someone remind me, was Anna Kasparian in Syria? I don't think so. When have you seen Anna Kasparian on the ground? Was she over there reporting about the attacks? No. But she's going to smear someone who was. By the way, this is a common trick that they'll tend to do. They'll smear you by putting you next to Russia, saying you're aligned with Russia. That's a big one. So let me finish this. She's just ridiculous. This was so unprofessional.
Very people they seem to be working for, to be quite honest with you. Let's move on.
All right, we're done.
Disgusting. Absolutely disgusting.
They said
I was muted. I just want to remind you of that she implied at the end that he seemed to be working for Russians. That was a smear. That smear sparked a lot of controversy. It sparked a lot of that. Aaron went on different shows to defend himself because of her ridiculousness. So that's where this started. I just wanted to remind you of that. So Aaron went on to defend himself. And one of the places that he went to was Rising, actually. So listen to this. Got to cue up my video. Okay. So Aaron had to play defense and had to go on all these different shows and defend his journalistic work. Because people believed what Anna Kasparian said. Do you know how dangerous that can be? He's secretly working for the Russians. Who are you secretly working for, Anna? Who are you taking money from? Oh, that's right. Jeffrey Katzenberg, the same guy who wanted to criminalize homelessness in Los Angeles. The same guy you took that $20 million contract from. Let's talk about who's working for who. So listen to this. So Aaron went on Rising to defend himself. 1 second.
Is a liar, as we saw when Cenk declared on his show that I'm paid by the Russians without any evidence, because there is none. He's just making it up. And look, I think when Cenk talks about Jimmy's audience being right wing, he's projecting. Jimmy's success over these last few years has come from the fact that he's speaking to an audience that is upset by the Democratic Party because they haven't been left wing enough. Jimmy's actually an authentic progressive. And he's attracted people who are upset by the fact that the Democratic Party establishment has abandoned it, and attracted people who are upset that outlets like the Young Turks that portray themselves as being progressive have abandoned progressive values and have done things like advocating for foreign interventions. And in the case of Russiagate, buying into the dumbest conspiracy theory of all time, which Jimmy Dore debunked. So I think that's what helps explains this animus and these lies towards Jimmy Dore by Cenk. And then I got involved when they directed it at me. I was in Syria recently doing some reporting, and they had this, Cenk and Anna Kasparian had this on-air meltdown where they said I'm paid by the Russians, that I deny the killing of children. Anna Kasparian said that I likely work for dictators, and she gave me the finger and told me to F off. It was insane. And I think that meltdown reflects just like a general hostility that they have towards people who are upholding actual progressive values and upholding actual journalism standards.
There you go. And that's what that's about. That's really what that is about. Because they're not really leftist per se. When do you see them? I'm just laughing. When do you see them out there fighting for these issues that they told us to go out there and fight for? When have you seen Anna Kasparian at a protest? Someone let me know. Someone let me know. They're not really about that life. They're not about that life. They want to pretend to be. And at the end of the day, they're the ones that told you to vote for Hillary Clinton and vote for Joe Biden. Let's all remember that. At the end of the day, they are the vote blue no matter who crowd. How's that working out for us? So now they have smeared him again. So let's get into this. Now, this is in reference to Russia and Ukraine. Let me go ahead and pull up this video. So some of you may know this, some of you may not know, but Caleb's going to talk more about this as well when he comes on. But this goes back to the issue at Snake Island, where it was discovered that Ukrainian soldiers, where they were pronounced dead, they were actually still alive. TYT reported on that. A lot of people reported on that and had the information correct. Aaron Mate apparently had the information incorrect, and Aaron Mate apparently had the correct information. So let me play this video. This is where they come after him again. Here we go.
Troops on Snake Island who defied a Russian warship and told them to go F themselves are reported to still be alive. However, the reports indicate that they are now prisoners of war since they've been captured by the Russian troops. Now, before we give you the details on this story and the update, let me show you the video that we're referencing here. Let's watch.
Все. Нахуй тоже надо.
All right, so they remained defiant, and the thought was that these Ukrainian troops died. I mean, I think that's, we didn't know for sure, but that's what it was being reported as. But here's the update. Ukraine's Navy wrote on Facebook that the border guards on Snake Island, which is about 30 miles off the coast of Ukraine and a strategic post in the Black Sea, may have been rescued as part of a civilian humanitarian mission. The ship that rescued them, however, was illegally captured by the Russians, the Navy contends. Now, again, officials had assumed that the 13 soldiers had died after they had lost contact with the garrison, which was destroyed by the Russian military in an artillery attack. But this is somewhat of a positive update. It's good to know that they're still alive, but unfortunately they're prisoners or made prisoners by the Russian troops. Now, what's kind of amazing about this is stories get updated, and as they get updated, you report the updates, you share them with your audience. That's what we're doing right now. But Russia apologists like Aaron Mate, Tim Pool, people like that, felt like this was a big gotcha for people who had reported on the original.
Did you guys see what she just did there? Did you see what she just did? It gets worse, by the way. She just called him a Russian apologist. What can I say? What can I say? I want to be very clear here when it comes to Ukraine and Russia. There is no good guy. Caleb will talk more about this, but there is no good guy. People who are pretending that Ukraine are the good guys, I want to remind everybody, the United States government is funding and helping Nazis in Ukraine. And you have all these talking heads around here pretending like that's not an issue. Everybody's just pointing fingers and saying Russia's the bad guy. They sound just like MSNBC and CNN. That's why I stopped watching them. I started to notice that about a year ago. So let's stop pretending that Ukraine are the good guys. They're not good in this either. And so because Aaron Mate is one of those people that will point out both sides, they're calling him a Russian apologist. Because he's not backing Joe Biden's talking points. So listen to the rest.
Original story. Not a gotcha if the story gets updated and then you do the update as we're doing right now. In fact, one of those people is Aaron Mate. I want to just share this quick exchange that he had with Cenk. Cenk writes, my new motto in life is Russian warship, go F yourself, making a reference to the original video that we talked about. And Mate says his favorite word, of course, which, it's a little funny in this context. McCarthyite dupe, go fact check yourself.
That's hilarious. So a couple of things about that. Number one, he's asking me to fact check whether my new motto is Russian warship, go after yourself. I did fact check that. It turns out it's still my new motto. So fact check completed.
Award-winning journalist, Cenk.
Okay,
award-winning journalist.
What a weird thing to ask someone to fact check. I mean, you're not asking me to fact check whether they died or not. You're asking me to fact check whether that's my motto. Why did you respond to that tweet? Because he wants to get at me. And he's trying to find a tweet like where he's like, okay, now I could pretend he got it wrong here.
You're just you're a Western chauvinist, Cenk.
Of course,
a Western a McCarthyite Western chauvinist. I mean, does anyone take this guy seriously?
Well, not anymore.
How can you guys, all you can do is laugh at this guy at this point.
Yeah, although the people.
Is she serious? Did she just say, does anyone take this guy seriously? You know who people don't take seriously anymore, Anna? You and TYT. I can't believe people still watch TYT. I really cannot, especially everything after Force the Vote. The things that they said about Julian Assange. I can't believe people still watch TYT. You are the ones that people don't take seriously anymore. And it's really interesting because if you look on YouTube, you'll see videos just from like 2-3 years ago where they've interviewed Aaron Mate multiple times. So what is it really about? Did you not consider him to be serious back then? Or is it because he's out there telling the truth? Listen to the rest.
People who did take him seriously should send in apologies,
Yeah.
not to us, but
No, to us.
to their audience.
Us.
No, but okay, fine, sure, to
Yeah,
us,
yeah.
particularly Dana, but to
No, you should send in apologies to your audience because you guys spew mainstream talking points 24 hours a day. I can't believe I used to watch TYT. I really can't believe I used to watch these guys, but you spew these talking points. You give your audience incorrect information. You side with Joe Biden, even when you know he's in the wrong. You guys are MSNBC light, maybe not even light anymore. So if anyone should apologize to their audience, it's TYT. I'll go back in.
to your audience, to your readers, to anyone who follows you on Twitter, you should send an apology saying, I'm so sorry I misled you by taking these guys seriously. Now look, back
it gets worse.
Yeah, it's gonna get much worse, you hold on. But I wanna finish the fact check, okay? Everyone thought they were dead. The Ukrainian government said they were dead. And by the way, the buildings were bombed. So I don't know how they got off the island. And by the way, I also don't necessarily believe the Ukrainian government's version of the story, that a civilian ship pulled up, took them out off the island, and then that ship got captured. It's possible the Russians landed and then they surrendered. We don't know, okay? I'm not taking any government's word for it. But in the beginning, they say that, it appears, the government says they're all dead, and it appears that the island has been bombed. So, okay, if you can't report that, you literally can't report anything in the middle of a war.
No, but like, what was the point of that really? What was the point of that? Was the point to show, oh, look at how compassionate the Russian troops are. They didn't actually murder these people.
Yeah, they only kidnapped them.
They only kidnapped them.
And took them hostage.
They're now only made prisoners of war. It's not a big, Putin is such a great, compassionate guy, right, Aaron Mate? I mean, he can't help himself. That's the amazing thing.
She's exaggerating. He didn't say that. Do you see these talking points? Not once did he say, oh, Putin is like this great guy. He did not say that. They're exaggerating. Another smear, you guys. They learned nothing from last year.
The dude who spends all day on Twitter searching phrases like, or words like Putin and Russia, so he can go after anyone who dare say anything that offends his daddy, his lovely little daddy who's so compassionate and so awesome. I love the fact that now they're twisting themselves into pretzels, trying to figure out what their talking points are gonna be when they've been shilling for Russia and Putin for literally years. What's your talking point now? I can't wait for the headlines that are about to emerge from Gray Zone and all these other authoritarian apologists, right? Ukraine invaded itself.
Yeah, I mean, they'll say anything. They'll say anything.
Right.
So, but one more thing before we get to how much worse it's gonna get. Guys, my first reaction when I found out that they had not been killed was, oh, thank God they're alive. Right? Because we thought they were all dead after such a brave thing to say, Russian warship, go after yourself, and it looks like they got hit with a bomb. And I remember thinking and saying, and I said it later in the show that day, imagine if you're their dad of the guy who said it, right? Or the son, or we don't know their family situation, but that's gotta be heartbreaking. So when I heard they were alive, I was like, yes, that was my first reaction. Aaron Mate's first reaction was, yes, now we will pretend that everything is a lie about Russia and that Russia's innocent of everything. Yeah. I can't wait to go tweeting against all the people who criticized my beloved daddy, my imperialist warmonger daddy, Vladimir Putin. Hey, guys, everybody in Gray Zone and Glenn Greenwald, who is humiliating himself now, and everyone else in that faction, can you just say something really simple like Putin obviously started the war? No matter what you think of NATO and what we should have done, etc., and we've criticized what we should have done in the lead up to what happened, right? Because we're honest, unlike you dirtbag propagandists. Can you say, hey, that was a war of aggression? Hey, no, Glenn will come back to. I'm not gonna say anything. You can't force me to say anything.
Yeah.
Okay. So the only thing they ever say is how great Russia is and how terrible anyone who opposes Russia is. They're just the most embarrassing people on earth. Can you for a second celebrate that those guys are still alive?
No, they
Instead
can't.
of rushing to Putin's defense, you're pathetic.
No, here's more though. We said it was about to get worse, and it is. So it's one thing to use this updated story to put out pro-Putin propaganda and go after people who are reporting the story as accurately as they can. It's another thing to just completely lie about what Putin is doing when he's specifically targeting civilians. So let's go to this tweet from.
I'm sorry, but you guys have been lying about what's happening with Ukraine. Do you guys know I saw a video the other day? There was a train coming through. They wouldn't let the African students get on the train to leave. They were trying to exit. They were trying to leave. They wouldn't let them on the train. Like, I'm sorry, but this is really dangerous what they're doing here. This is the second time that they have come after him, smearing him, saying, oh, he's some type of Russian apologist. Oh, he's working for Russia. When they have no proof of that. They have no evidence. That is corrupt. That is so shady. And I don't remember hearing about Anna Kasparian or Cenk Uygur, either one of them being on the ground. They should be ashamed of themselves. We're just going to ignore the fact of what's been going on the past 8 years. We're just going to ignore the fact that the United States government is helping Nazis in Ukraine. We're just going to ignore that. This is terrible. This is absolutely terrible.
From Mate. Russia has not used anywhere near its full military power. It's avoided civilian areas and focused on NATO-tied military targets. Let's just pause right there. That's the relevant sentence there. I'm gonna repeat it. This is from Aaron Mate. This is his tweet. It's a screenshot from his tweet. He's gonna try to weasel his way out of this. But here's what he wrote verbatim. Putin avoided civilian areas and focused on NATO-tied military targets. Oh, that's fascinating because there's quite a bit of footage and quite a bit of evidence that that is not the case. He claims that CNN, MSNBC, Fox, they're struggling, man. They're struggling to find the actual footage. Maybe you're struggling to process what you're viewing because there's quite a bit of evidence. We'll show you right now. Why don't we go to the next video?
Now, Russia's claimed its attacks are aimed only at military targets, but you've seen the pictures and you see them in front of you now. We've seen damage to neighborhoods, to schools.
Can't do any research or find any evidence of civilians being targeted by Russian troops. Because that's how award-winning journalists conduct business. That's how they do their jobs. What a freaking clown.
Okay, guys, Caleb is here, so I'm going to go ahead and bring him in. It's always funny to me, too, because Anna always brings up the fact that he's an award-winning journalist. It's almost like there's some type of jealousy there. I don't know. Let's bring Caleb in.
Hi.
Hi, Caleb. Perfect timing.
Sure.
Everyone, Caleb Maupin is here. He is back. So I definitely want to get your insight about the conflict with Russia and Ukraine. I know you've seen a lot of things on Twitter as well. There's been a lot of people going around calling people Russian apologists, saying that they're secret Russian assets. I just heard the other day that RT was taken down in some countries. So I want to get your take on this. Can you please explain to everyone what really started this whole conflict? Because from what I've read, this has been going on for 8 years.
Sure. Well, as far as the first thing that you said, my personal Twitter account that belongs to me personally, does not belong to my employers at RT, has nothing to do with anybody in Russia, just belongs to me, a US-born citizen from Ohio who doesn't even speak Russian, who doesn't come from a Russian family, has been labeled Russian state-affiliated media. And that's BS. My employers at RT do not tell me what to tweet. Nobody in Russia tells me what to tweet. I decide what I put on my personal Twitter account. And the fact that Twitter labeled it that way shows you what they're doing. They don't want you to listen to what certain people have to say. And so they pin a label on them and say, oh, don't believe anything they say because they're this. Meanwhile, just watching that clip that you just showed me, and you just showed on there how much fake news is coming out from mainstream media. So many videos that have been debunked, that have been from Libya. or from Syria, or from Palestine, or from Iraq, or from video games are circulating. I mean, they are just putting out fake clips everywhere, but we're supposed to keep trusting them. And then because I work at a Russian company, you know, you can just push this, you can just pin this on my Twitter and label me as a Russian asset or whatever. When I'm a patriotic American from here in the United States, I'm a socialist, I'm a left winger. You know, I was marching in support of the peoples of Donetsk and Lugansk back in 2014 before I ever worked at RT. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. But as far as how this started when the United States overthrew Ukraine's government. In 2014, the United States toppled the elected government led by Viktor Yanukovych, and they installed a virulently anti-Russian government. And the people in the eastern regions declared independence. And they asked Russia to recognize their independent governments, and Russia said no. And instead, Russia supported the Minsk agreement. And they said, no, we don't want you to join Russia. We don't want you to be independent of Ukraine. We want you to reintegrate back into Ukraine, and we have been supporting the Minsk peace process to allow and enable that to happen. That's what happened. And in 2015, those Minsk agreements were signed and they were not implemented. The exact opposite of what those Minsk agreements said was carried out. They shelled and bombed and attacked and sent drones to attack the eastern regions. 14,000 people are dead. And these regions, Donetsk and Lugansk, have continually been attacked. Now, then about a month ago, we had U.S. officials who came out and they just started announcing to the world that Russia was planning to invade Ukraine. And Russia was like, no, we're not. We're not going to invade Ukraine. That's not going to happen. We're not going to invade Ukraine. And they said, no, Russia is about to invade Ukraine. And Russia said, we are not planning to invade Ukraine. And Russia actually started moving their troops away from the border to prove that they weren't going to invade Ukraine. And just as they started moving their troops away from the border, that is when there were bombs that went off. In certain parts of Lugansk and Donetsk. There were bombs that went off. There were explosions, and then from there, just one quick second.
Thanks so much for the super sticker, Jason.
My apologies. I just didn't want us to be interrupted by background noise. A lot of strange things going on in the studio these days. So anyway, so bombs started going off. And, on Friday, you had explosions in Donetsk and explosions in Lugansk. And these explosions started going off and you had an escalation of the shelling. And then it became clear what the United States was doing. They were threatening to invade. They were playing up the idea that Russia was planning to invade Ukraine, so that when they went and did an all-out, onslaught to retake these eastern regions, Russia would feel they weren't able to move in and protect the people there. That's what it was. It was a maneuver. They were going to set the stage they knew that they were planning to attack these eastern regions, and they knew Russia would feel obligated to protect the people there. So they were trying to psych up the world for when Russia moved in to protect these people, Russia would look like the aggressor. And for a month, they beat the drum that Russia's about to invade Ukraine. And then they went ahead and attacked the eastern regions. And Russia said, okay, now we know what's going on. And so they moved their forces in. They recognized, after 8 years of waiting, they recognized the People's Republic of Donetsk and the People's Republic of Lugansk. And then from there, after that, they sent their forces furthermore into Ukraine to break apart the Ukrainian military. The Ukrainian military that has been shelling and bombing and attacking the people of the eastern regions for the past 8 years has killed 14,000 of them. Not only do they want to protect the people there, but they want to break apart that Ukrainian military that the US government has been pouring weapons into, that has a special neo-Nazi division called the Azov Battalion. They want to break it up so that they can't continue to terrorize these people. And they will withdraw their forces from the country. They have no intention of occupying Ukraine, but they're not going to withdraw their forces until they have a clear understanding that Ukraine is not going to join the NATO alliance and Ukraine is going to leave the people of Lugansk and Donetsk alone. This is a picture you will never see on CNN. And I've got this picture here because they have never shown it on CNN. The whole world needs to see this. This is a monument in Lugansk to all the children who have died from the shelling that has taken place with US-made weapons. These are stuffed animals down here, And these are the faces of all the children who've been killed. All of these people have been dying over the past 8 years. These are children. They've got parents, they've got brothers and sisters, they've got mothers, they've got fathers, they've got their names here on the memorial below. All of these people were killed by the U.S. aligned regime in Kiev. They were killed. These are all children under the age of 18, most of them under the age of 12, who died as a result of what this government has been doing. And Russia has sat back and said, implement the Minsk agreements, just implement the Minsk agreements. They waited for 8 years. When Biden called this an unprovoked action last night, that was ridiculous. It has been provoked and provoked and provoked and provoked. It was provoked when the USA toppled the Ukrainian government and installed a fanatical anti-Russian government in Kiev. It was provoked when they shelled the eastern regions and attacked these people. It was provoked when the USA talked about having the Ukrainian government that is so hostile to Russia join NATO. It was provoked when the government in Kiev announced that they were thinking about getting nuclear weapons. It was provoked. Can you imagine for a moment that some racist conservative governor in Texas or Arizona or New Mexico passed a law and started taking Latino or Chicano people to court for speaking Spanish, right? That would be rightly denounced as a very racist, evil thing to do. But that's what the government in Kiev has been doing. They have been giving people tickets and taking them to court, giving them court appearances for speaking Russian, their own language. Can you believe this? This is what they've been doing for the past 8 years. People have been dragged to court, fined for speaking their own language. They have torn down World War II memorials. There are World War II memorials all over Ukraine because many Ukrainians heroically fought the Nazis. But the new government that was installed by the United States has been tearing those World War II memorials down and instead building memorials to the people who fought on the side of the Nazis, the Stepan Bandera, Ukrainian Liberation Fighting Force, whatever they want to call themselves. They've been building memorials to Nazi collaborators. They made this group of fascists and Hitler admirers, they made them an official wing of the government. And all these people say, oh, it's called the Azov Battalion. And whenever you bring this up, the people say, oh, that's just a small group. It doesn't matter if it's a small group. If we made the Ku Klux Klan an official wing of the U.S. government, it wouldn't matter if there were 100 of them or 5 of them. That's a statement, in and of itself. And people say, well, Vladimir Zelensky, the president, is Jewish. Yes, he is. Vladimir Zelensky was elected on a platform of bringing the country back together, of peace. And he took office and he didn't do that because it's very apparent he doesn't have the real power. The real power in Ukraine is in the hands of the military and it's in the hands of the United States. They say that Ukraine is an independent country. It's not independent. It is very clearly directed by a network of NGOs and Pentagon advisors. And Zelensky, who took office saying he was going to bring the country back together, he was going to start getting along with Russia, he was going to make this whole division in the country go away. He wasn't able to do it because he doesn't really run the country. The country is being directed by the United States, by Britain, by France, by Germany, by NATO. It's being directed by weapons contractors, and it's being used. And the most horrible thing about this is that they are making it sound like the United States cares so much for the Ukrainian people. But if the reality is, if you cared about the Ukrainian people, you wouldn't push them into a war with Russia and throw their lives away like this. And that's what has gone on. The Ukrainian people largely don't want a war, right? They don't want a war. They might some of them might be hostile to Russia. Some of them might like Russia. Some of them might be indifferent. They don't like what's happening right now in the country. And if you really care about the people of Ukraine, you wouldn't be pushing them into a conflict with a great power. So that's a lot that needs to be said that you're never going to hear on American mainstream media.
Very good points. Let's talk about the sanctions because I am pretty troubled that I've been hearing. I'm talking about people in left independent media making excuses for sanctions, saying, oh, just a little bit of sanctions is okay. I'm appalled by this. I guess I shouldn't be shocked because a lot of people's talking points have changed over the past year. But I want to make it very clear to people, sanctions are not a good thing because the United States government put sanctions on Afghanistan and people are starving in Afghanistan because of that. And last night, I watched that State of the Union address and Joe Biden is bragging about that. And I'm watching all of them stand up and clap. And my fear is that the average American who is probably not watching any type of independent media, only watch CNN or Fox News or MSNBC, they're going to think that's a good thing and not really realize what that does to all the people. It's not just the people who are on the battlefield. It's not just the people, it's not just Putin, it's all of the civilians there will be affected, and people can starve because of that. And I feel like the average person that I bring this up to, they don't realize that. And so I want to get your take on that about putting sanctions on Russia. And how do you feel about some of the talking points that's been coming out of left independent media about this conflict?
Well, first of all, I think we can look at this beyond Russia, right? Let's just, put Russia aside for the moment. Russia is one of the main producers of fertilizer in the world. And right now we're already having, a crisis of malnutrition. And in Africa, there have been millions of malnutrition related deaths since the beginning of the pandemic. In South America, there have been a lot of malnutrition related deaths since the beginning of the pandemic, and the supply chain issues and the slowdown in the global economy. For us in the United States, it's caused a lot of people to lose their jobs and their incomes have gone down. It's hurt a lot of working families. But in countries like, the third world, where people are in very, very low conditions already, this pandemic and the economic fallout has killed people. And so now these sanctions that are going to be put on Russia will prevent Russia from exporting fertilizer. And Brazil, the representative of Brazil, that got up and spoke at the UN, pointed out that if Brazil is not able to get the Russian fertilizer that's set to be sent to Brazil, there are not going to be crops that grow in Brazil. And the same for many African countries. These sanctions that are being imposed, they're going to have a big effect in Russia, no doubt. And they're going to cost a lot to ordinary Russian people that have nothing to do with this conflict. But on top of that, they are going to take a humanitarian toll around the world. I mean, there are going to be a lot of crops that do not grow because Russian fertilizer does not get there. And this is the weird thing about Joe Biden. He seems to have no problem killing people via starvation. Because, after Afghanistan was devastated by 20 years of U.S. occupation, he then pulled out of Afghanistan in a very chaotic way. And he froze all their funds. And Afghanistan is now having a crisis of malnutrition. And he froze all of their money. He gave it to the 9/11 victims now who have nothing to do. Afghanistan had nothing to do with 9/11. It was a Saudi named Osama bin Laden who was officially blamed for 9/11. No one blames the Afghan people for 9/11. So Joe Biden essentially starved millions of Afghans. I mean, there are thousands, if not millions of Afghans who are suffering from malnutrition now because of Joe Biden's decision to freeze their money and take Afghanistan's money in the middle of an economic crisis, in the middle of the aftermath of years of occupation and instability in the country. So now it looks like Joe Biden is going to deprive the world of Russia's fertilizer. And the humanitarian cost of that is massive. And that is terrifying. I mean, when we think about it, that is absolutely terrifying. I mean, this is an action that's going to cost a lot of lives.
This is terrible. Like, it's just, I don't think it. How many people do you think, people that you've spoken to, how many of them are aware of this part?
None. This is not widely discussed, right? Russian media is talking about it. People in the developing world are talking about it. They're talking about it in Brazil. They're talking about it in Africa. But the United States is certainly not talking about it. And U.S. media is covering it up. What they're doing right now is they're just having this hysterical, emotional campaign. Look at Ukraine. Look how bad they're suffering. Don't you feel sorry for them? What? You don't care? Oh, you're not mad at Putin now? You have no heart. You're not waving the Ukrainian flag. You haven't put a Ukrainian flag up on your Facebook. You heartless person. It's this big emotional campaign. One of the best video analyses of it I saw, they compared it to arguing in a public place with someone who's crying. Imagine you're in a public place and someone's arguing with you and they start crying. Well, you have to stop arguing that at that point because no one is going to know what you're arguing about, but they're just going to see that person crying and they're going to go, oh, what a heartless person. You're arguing with this poor person who's crying. That's what they're doing in U.S. media. No one knows anything about Ukraine. So many of these people that are suddenly just so moved and emotional about the Ukrainian people, they can't find Ukraine on a map. They have no idea what's going on. And it's not their fault. That's the fault of American media. It's the fault of the American educational system. But now the public is being psyched up to hysterically support a war, to support a government that has been shelling and attacking its own people for 8 years and killed lots of its own people, that has been propping up forces that want to rehabilitate the Nazis and Nazi collaborators. Has been pushing some of the most, virulent, hate and hostility as an official fascist wing of its military. That's who they want to support. And they don't want to acknowledge that the United States pushed Ukraine into this. The United States piled weapons into Ukraine. The Ukrainian people voted for Zelensky because he was going to stop this. And he wasn't allowed to, because Ukraine is not really an independent country. It's a colony of Wall Street and London and US imperialism. And that aspect of this conflict isn't being portrayed. It's basically the way we're hearing about it in mainstream American media is that, Putin was having a bad day and he hates freedom. And he saw this country, Ukraine, and he was like, oh, they're free and I can't stand it. And he rolled the tanks in. And that's so far from what is happening. There was one CNN anchor who said that Ukraine was a, quote, peaceful country before this event. It's like, it wasn't a peaceful country for the past 8 years, I'll tell you that much. And that just shows you how delusional the narrative we're getting is. So yeah, there you go. It's deeply, deeply frustrating. But now it's a really important time for those of us who are anti-imperialists, because I'm seeing a lot of waffling now. I'm seeing a lot of people that are saying things like, sure, the United States and NATO, they did a lot to provoke this, but Russia is still wrong. And no, hold the line, right? That is what I'm telling people. Stand firm. Stand firm on this. Russia doesn't want to be doing this. Russia would prefer, they wanted the Minsk agreements to be recognized and Ukraine to bring Lugansk and Donetsk back into Ukraine. They don't want this, and they have to do it. And they felt that they have no other choice, that NATO is setting up shop on their border, that the people of Lugansk and Donetsk are being slaughtered. They feel like they have no other choice. And honestly, I think Russia probably should have done this 8 years ago. And if the left wing, if the Communist Party, which is a very big party in Russia, had been in power 8 years ago, they would have done this a lot sooner. I really, this idea, this understanding of events that we're hearing in the United States is just so far off. It's ridiculous. And look, Russia is doing this because they feel they have to. And it could stop at any point. If the Ukrainian authorities really care about their people, all they'd have to say is, fine, we'll leave the people in Donetsk and Lugansk alone. We'll stop importing U.S. weapons, and Russia would withdraw their forces. They've made that offer over and over and over again. And they're not willing to bring that up. One analogy I've made many, many times, and I must make this analogy, is, every time Israel goes into Gaza and just starts slaughtering people, right? We remember this. It's happened so many times. Israel will go into Gaza, and it'll always be in response to like 1 or 2 rockets from the Palestinians that will hit Israel, maybe 1 or 2 people being killed. And then they'll go in and they'll slaughter hundreds of people, right? And the mainstream U.S. media in the United States always says, well, Israel has a right to defend itself. Israel has a right to defend itself. Well, here you have a situation where Russia has waited. It hasn't been 1 rocket or 2 rockets. It's been thousands of rockets and 14,000 people dead for 8 years straight. And now Russia is taking action. And they call it an unprovoked invasion or something like that. This is absolutely ridiculous. If Israel has a right to defend itself against 1 rocket, doesn't Russia have the right to defend the peoples of Donetsk and Lugansk against 8 years of violent attacks? This is so much of a double standard, from U.S. media. And it's deeply, deeply frustrating. And that's why those of us in alternative media, those of us who don't buy into it, we need to just scream from the heavens that, okay, this is bad. I'm not happy this is happening, right? The people there obviously are suffering. That's an awful situation. But Russia is in the right. And the Ukrainian government, backed up by the United States, is in the wrong. Look, I'll tell you one thing. The fact that the Ukrainian government is calling for international volunteers right now, okay, like all they would have to do is sign, a treaty to leave Donetsk and Lugansk alone, not, take in any more U.S. weapons, and this would be over. But their official military has basically collapsed at this point, and they're calling for people from around the world to go to Ukraine and fight on their behalf. Why is that preferable to ending the war? Who is really in charge here? It sounds like the United States really wants Ukraine to become the Soviet Union or Russia's Afghanistan, right? They want Russia to have to be there for a long time. They want the fighting to go on for years. They want people to just keep. That's what they want to go on here. I can guarantee you, as many Ukrainians as there are who don't like Russia and are mad at Russia, that's not what they want for their homeland. They don't want their homeland to become the next Afghanistan where there's fighting going on for years and years and years. But that's what the Ukrainian government seems to want. That's what they want. And it's shocking. And it shows you, again, they keep saying that Ukraine is independent. Ukraine is not independent. It's a colony of the United States. It's a colony of the West. If it was really an independent country, then Zelensky would have been able to deliver on his campaign promises and de-escalate all of this.
Well said. How do you feel about, so I did a poll last night and I wanted to make a comparison. So I'm going to share my screen because I saw this poll from Breaking Points and it was deeply concerning to me because that's independent media. Obviously, Crystal's on the left, Saugers, supposedly be on the right, but not like Trump right. But these numbers were concerning to me. And this is the second poll I've seen from them about war, where the majority of their audience members support war. So this was the question. Do you support Western sanctions and economic warfare against Russia? 66% of their viewers said yes. And 19% said no. 15% said unsure. But 66% said yes. And I'm wondering to myself, like, do they even know what that really means? Like, how could you support sanctions? Like, do you know what happens when the United States government puts sanctions on other countries? Or maybe they know and they just don't care.
No, they don't know. They have no idea. Sanctions sounds really benign, right? It sounds very, very benign. It's a euphemism, right? It's a way of saying, we're going to sanction countries. I don't know. I used to really like that show, Third Rock from the Sun. You ever watch that show? It was like a 90s like sitcom. And I remember there's an episode where he's a college professor and he's done something wrong or something. And they're like, you as a college professor, you're going to be sanctioned. And he's like, well, what does that mean? And they said, that means that you will be officially sanctioned. And he says, well, does that mean that I'm going to have a pay cut or anything? They said, no. But if you do it again, they said, you will be, they had some other term. And he said, well, what does that mean? And they said, well, that means you'll get, you'll be suspended for 3 days. And he says, with pay? And they said, yes. And he said, can I be that now? And they said, no, you're sanctioned. I mean, it's a vague term that just means like punished or something like that. Right. But in terms of economics, it's not a joke. It's a very, very serious thing. It's a very, very serious thing. It prevents people from doing business. When I was in Iran, I met people who, couldn't become airline pilots because Iran doesn't have enough airplane parts because the United States manufactures a lot of airplane parts and has sanctioned any airline that would sell, airline parts to Iran. So Iran only has a certain number of airplanes. There's a lot of Iranians who want to become airline pilots who can't do it because they don't have enough planes because of the sanctions. When I went to the World Festival of Youth and Students in Quito, Ecuador, I met a Cuban young man, teenager, who was in a wheelchair. And he was in a wheelchair because he could not get certain medicine that is sanctioned and prevented from getting into Cuba because of the economic blockade and embargo facing Cuba. This guy's in a wheelchair. He can't walk because of sanctions. There are people, the U.S. sanctions on Venezuela have caused, a food crisis that has cost thousands of lives, according to the United Nations. These sanctions are not, they're not benign. They're very, very serious, right? And by calling them sanctions, it's a euphemism. It's economic warfare is what it should be called. It's war without bombs. It's using starvation as a weapon of war. That's what it is. And it should be absolutely opposed. And most of these sanctions are unilateral, meaning the United States imposes them without, consulting with any other country. And a lot of these sanctions are imposed in the form of a state of emergency, where the president imposes them, claiming that there's some kind of national security threat to the United States. Meaning that he doesn't even have the constitutional power to do it. If we're going to, pass a law that you can't do business with this country or that country, that should go through Congress. But there's a loophole where the president can declare a state of emergency with regard to Zimbabwe or a state of emergency with regard to Russia or Iran. And he doesn't even have to get the permission of Congress, but he has to claim somehow these countries are a threat to the United States. Zimbabwe is not a threat to the United States. Belarus is not a threat to the United States. Russia is not a threat to the United States. So even the legality of how these sanctions are imposed is absolutely ridiculous. And it's done in a way that there doesn't even really have to be much debate about it. The president just feels like it and says that based on something, somehow it's a threat to America or something. So the president does it unilaterally. I mean, it's really ridiculous.
Interesting. So I want to show you this as well, because I asked my audience that same poll last night. And these are the results. Same question. Do you support Western sanctions and economic warfare against Russia? 81% said no. And so that to me It says something about the talking points. And I don't know why this is happening, but I've seen too many people, whether it's been on shows, whether it's been on Twitter, who are on the left, all of a sudden, now that Biden's president and Trump is not, they're making excuses for this.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's deeply, deeply disturbing to me. And it seems like that is one of the dangerous aspects of all of this wokeism, is that they have turned social justice and being a socially aware and conscious person and being concerned about things like racism and injustice and income inequality, and they've flipped it around to being an advocate of imperialism. You know, I went to college, and I hated college. But before I went to college, my whole family said to me, Caleb, you're going to love college. You're always reading books and you're learning about countries. You're going to love college. College is going to be so amazing for you. And I went to college and I hated it. I absolutely hated it. But that's because what the universities in the United States are has drastically changed. During the Cold War in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, after the 1960s political upsurge mainly, universities in the United States were kind of bastions of free thought. You know, your average Americans were my country, right or wrong, supported the wars and such, but people went to college, and in college they learned that there's two sides to every story. They learned that there might be another side to Nicaragua or Iraq or whatever was going on, and colleges were a little more of a free-thinking place. But now it's flipped. Average working class Americans, they may not know very much about Ukraine or Afghanistan or China or whatever, but they don't want new wars, and they don't trust the government, and they are suspicious of authority, and they're watching the country fall apart. Meanwhile, it's people who go to college who get kind of indoctrinated into the new woke imperialist, mantra. And you go to college and you learn to repeat what the professor says, and you learn and you get kind of ideologically cleansed to make sure that you are trustworthy enough to get a place in the middle class. And the most blatant place that I saw this was when I worked at the United Nations. When I was in the UN press corps, I worked with a TV network from the Middle East, a small TV network, but there's not many journalists who are at the UN all year round. There's a very small press corps at the UN, and I had an office at the UN, and I was right next to ABC News and CBS and Fox. And these people had gone to Harvard, they had gone to Yale, they had gone to Stanford, the best schools of journalism. These were people that were like the most qualified. And I would talk to them and tell them how we were covering things related to Syria or Russia or other countries around the world that were controversial. And their jaws would drop because they had never heard these arguments before. And these are like the smartest people, the people with the highest level of education. And I was shocked. I thought, how can these be like the smartest people in the country? And they have no clue what the other side of the story is. How is this even possible? But then I realized that's how they got there to begin with. That education in the United States has basically become a test of conformity. And if you conform and obey and learn to repeat what your professor says and learn to, repeat the talking points in the party line, and you don't think about it too much, you can get ahead. And if you question things, if you're some person who is a little more, capable of asking difficult questions or thinking more deeply, you get punished in American education. American education is the opposite of what it's supposed to be. My whole life I've heard people say, I think for myself. That's this whole American thing. Think for yourself, right? Think for yourself. Everyone thinks for themselves. I used to hand out leaflets, anti-war leaflets. People would say, oh no, I can't take that. I think for myself. So I don't want you to corrupt me with that. But the funny thing is, everyone who thinks for themselves thinks exactly the same way. They all have the exact same conclusions. Whereas it's those of us who dare to consume alternative media, it's those of us who dare to hear the other side of the story. We tend to think a little bit differently. And in a lot of ways, thinking for ourselves is kind of become a euphemism for not thinking at all. Americans can't find their country on a map, right? We can't. I mean, we can't find the countries we're bombing on a map. We're so busy thinking for ourselves and having no one tell us what to think and making up our own minds that we have no clue what's going on in the world. And we, when the US media is whipping us up into a hysteria about Ukraine, we just go along with it. It really goes to show you how hypocritical a lot of this is. What they're doing to my TV network where I work, RT, right now is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, the way that we have been, banned from the airwaves in the European Union, the way that they're targeting us in the United Kingdom, the way that our website is being targeted. It is absolutely insane. If every country that did something that the international community didn't agree with was treated this way, it would be very, very different. The UN has voted over and over and over again to condemn Israel for what they do to the Palestinians. But, you don't see them banning Israeli TV networks, banning Israeli websites. You don't see that, right? The UN has voted every year, like practically since the Cuban Revolution, almost every year since then, the UN has voted to condemn the U.S. blockade of Cuba. And it's overwhelming. The U.S. blockade of Cuba is condemned by the UN General Assembly because the U.S. blockade of Cuba is inhumane. It is unbelievable. They're blocking medicine, and the UN overwhelmingly votes to condemn the blockade of Cuba. But yet, no country in the world is banning U.S. TV networks because of that. No country in the world is shutting down U.S. TV networks because of what the USA has done. The USA has killed millions of people in Vietnam and Korea. The USA invaded Iraq without, based on lies about weapons of mass destruction, without any possible justification. And you didn't see the world community banning, U.S. media because of that. So this is the singling out and targeting of Russia. And when it really gets down to is that Russia is never going to be allowed to be part of the club, right? The Western imperial countries, the former colonizers, the British, the Americans, the French, the Germans, they have been dominating the world for a long time. They've dominated the world economy. And they have been, World War I and World War II was largely these countries fighting over which chunk of the world they got. The Germans wanted a chunk of the world for themselves, and the British and the Americans wanted them to not have it. And so you had World War I. After World War I, Germany was stripped of its colonies. And so then Hitler came back in and started re-seizing territory and trying to re-seize territory. So we had World War II. But the Western capitalist countries have always dominated the world. Well, in the 20th century, Russia and China both had socialist revolutions. They overthrew capitalism. And with socialist methods, they raised their people out of poverty. They electrified their countries. They raised their people up. They built modern electricity and power plants and steel mills. And with socialism, they both became superpowers. Both of these countries, Russia and China, became superpowers. However, the Western imperialists have said, well, you're not allowed to be a superpower. We're the superpowers. You can't be part of the club. Right? You may have had your revolutions, you may have built yourselves up, but we're never going to let you become just equal members of the global economy. We have kind of an arrangement among ourselves that we don't all like each other. The French and the Americans, the British and the Germans, we fight with each other, but we have an arrangement among ourselves. But we all agree you're not allowed to be part of the club. It's like a mafia cartel. It's really what it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
The local criminal gangs may fight with each other. They don't like each other. But at the end of the day, they do have an agreement among themselves that if somebody else comes along, they're gonna not let them. They're all gonna line up against them. And that's the thing. They won't let Russia and China just be real developed countries that are part of the global economy. And I think, after the fall of the Soviet Union, Russia was basically promised that they would be allowed that. And in the 1990s, their economy was very, very bad. But Putin came in and he fixed their economy by reasserting government control over oil and gas. And Russia was under the impression that they would be allowed to just be a real country that had their own interest and had their own economy and had their own industries and all of that. And the United States has made clear it will not allow that. It doesn't care that they used to be communist. They're not communist anymore, right? The Soviet Union's over. Doesn't matter. It was never about communism to begin with. It was about the fact that Russia used to be poor, and now Russia is a fully developed country, and they don't want the competition. That's not how they want the world economy to be. And the same with China, right? They don't like the fact that China used to be poor and now is a fully developed economy. It's the second largest economy in the world. They don't like that. They don't want the competition. And that's what it really gets down to. All their talk about free markets and free trade, that's a joke. They don't really believe in that. If they don't want to compete on a level playing field with Russia and China, and they will drive, they apparently want to drive these countries out of the economy with war.
Agreed. And what you said about universities is so true, because I worked in higher ed for years. And actually, when Bernie was running, I was still working in higher ed, and I heard a Bernie sticker in my office. Boy, was that a mistake, because people would come into my office and they would say, "Oh, are you a socialist?" And I'm like, is that a problem? It was just really weird. I was like, oh, so much for free thought and being liberating here at these universities. They are more on the conservative side than people may realize. I do want to shout out the super chats really quick. Thanks so much, Black in the Empire, for the super chat. Love you, Sabby. Great to see Caleb on. Thank you so much. And thanks, Cheese Sandwich, for the super chat. Says thanks. Thanks so much. Ashura says, has Caleb seen the dumb attacks by Oh God.
I made a video response to that. I made a video. I mean, Kyle Kalinske, he said, that I'm so against U.S. imperialism, I'm supporting Russian imperialism. So I just made a video rebuttal. You can go to my channel and watch it, explaining what imperialism actually means. Imperialism doesn't mean sending troops to a country. Imperialism means a global economic setup, capitalism in its monopoly stage. Yep. That's what imperialism is. And Russia is not that. Russia is not keeping countries poor in order to, enrich itself and dominate the world markets. It's actually doing the opposite. I've been to Crimea, right? I have actually seen with my own eyes Crimea, right? The region that, declared independence from Ukraine and joined with Russia in 2014, where there was a big Russian military base and the people there all worked at the Russian military base. And so they just, when the USA overthrew the Ukrainian government in 2014, they just voted to join with Russia. And I've been there, and I'll tell you, imperialism is about keeping countries poor, right? And what I saw was not a country that was being kept poor. I saw the opposite. Russia has poured economic development into Crimea. They've built this huge bridge connecting Crimea to Russia. They have brought in so many businesses and so much development. There's many different ethnic groups in Crimea, but they have all benefited from the development and from joining with Russia. And that's not imperialism. Imperialism is not a word for send troops to a country. Imperialism is not a word for expanding territory. And it's unfortunate. That's why we need to fight for the scientific Marxist definition of these terms. Imperialism is capitalism in its monopoly stage. It is keeping the world poor so that Wall Street and London can stay rich. And Russia is fighting imperialism by sending their forces into Ukraine to stand up against this NATO government that has been imposed on the country.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And that's the thing. If you talk about imperialism in the right way, then you have to address the capitalism problem. And some people don't want to address the capitalism problem because they're capitalists. Lex has a good question here. What, in your opinion, would happen if Ukraine joins NATO?
Well, I mean, at this point, Ukraine joining NATO would almost be symbolic. It would make sure that this conflict didn't end. That's for sure, because Russia does not want to have, the Ukrainian government, the one that was installed in 2014. It's very hostile to Russia, join and is right on its borders and is getting U.S. weapons and such. They don't want to have that country joining NATO right on their border. And that's kind of what, it's a big factor in what motivated what's going on here. You have to remember that the way NATO works is if one NATO country gets attacked, all of them get involved, right? It's an alliance, right? That's how it works, that NATO countries all host troops from various other NATO countries. And that, Ukraine joining NATO would be a direct threat to Russia. You have to remember, Russia was promised when the Soviet Union fell that NATO would not move 1 inch eastward, that it would not move 1 inch closer to Russia. And that promise has been broken over and over and over again. And in this case, now we have Ukraine, which had a pretty neutral, friendly government that was kind of trying to balance the Russian-speaking folks with the Ukrainian-speaking folks. It was just, kind of a neutral government. The USA toppled that and installed this fanatically anti-Russian government that's tearing down the World War II memorials, that's fining people and giving them tickets for speaking the Russian language. It installed that government in there. And now, if that government were to then join the NATO pact, that would be a threat on Russia. That's what that would be. That would be a huge threat. That would be like Russia sending troops to Mexico and piling a bunch of Russian troops in Mexico. We wouldn't tolerate that, obviously. And that's what that would be. And so, Ukraine joining NATO would not resolve this in any way.
Do you think that NATO should go?
Yes. Yeah. NATO doesn't benefit the United States. NATO was formed because after the Second World War, after the Nazis were defeated, in many countries, you had what they called people's democracies, which was government was formed, made up of the various anti-fascist parties. It was the Communist Party in coalition, usually with the Socialist Party or the Social Democratic Party. Usually there was some kind of Christian anti-fascist party as well. And the countries that were liberated by the Soviet Union in the fight against fascism, they established these people's democratic governments, they were called. And the people's democratic governments did not allow any former Nazis or Nazi collaborators in their governments. They said, if you worked with the Nazis to occupy this country, you're not allowed to be part of the government. That's where the government of East Germany came from. That's where the government of Czechoslovakia came from. That's where the government of Bulgaria came from. These were what they called the people's democratic governments. And The United States didn't like that because after the Second World War, the United States was busy recruiting all the Nazis to fight communists. And, in France and in Germany, West Germany and Spain and all these places, all these former Nazis were being recruited to run U.S. intelligence and run U.S. military forces. And the United States was kind of getting ready to fight against communism. So NATO was formed as an anti-communist bloc, basically, to prevent the spread of these anti-fascist people's democracies that were emerging in the aftermath of the Second World War. And that's why NATO was formed. And you have the Greek Civil War, where the United States, that had just ended a war with Nazis, is suddenly, working with Nazi collaborators in the Greek monarchy to fight against the People's Democratic Anti-Fascist coalitions in Greece. You can, go across the line there. In France, for example. In France, the communists were very popular after World War II because they had been la resistance, right? It was the communists who, when the Nazis took over France, they were the ones who blew up train tracks, and they were the ones that got jobs in, gun factories and sabotaged the guns. And the communists were the heroic underground anti-fascist fighters. So after the Second World War was over, they had an election in France, and the Communist Party did amazingly well, and they won a lot of seats in the government. And then because France, wanted to be part of NATO and wanted to get Marshall Plan aid, France was basically forced to kick all the communists out of the government, even though they were elected. They were kicked out of the cabinet. That happened, right after the Second World War. And, the way the United States was operating was you weren't allowed in the aftermath of the Second World War, you weren't allowed to have communists in your government, even if the people voted for you. And that's what was going on. And the most blatant example of that is on the Korean Peninsula. The Soviet Union liberated the northern half of the Korean Peninsula, and the bottom half of the Korean Peninsula surrendered, and then you had U.S. troops there. And so the idea was that they would have one Korea, and they'd have elections for all of Korea, and they would elect a new government. But then the United States supported Syngman Rhee to become the military dictator of South Korea, and established a military dictatorship. And then the peoples on Jeju Island, who were sympathizers with communism, they started protesting for democracy. So then U.S. troops and the South Korean military went to Jeju Island and killed thousands and thousands of people. And so in response to that, you had a situation where Korea was divided. You had the Korean War, and Korea's been divided ever since. And that, in country after country, the communists wanted to be part of coalition governments. That's the most untold story. Mao and Chiang Kai-shek wanted to form a unified government in China. They wanted, after World War II, after Japan was kicked out of China, they wanted to have a unified government where the nationalist KMT party of Chiang Kai-shek and the Communist Party could rule China together. But the United States said to Chiang Kai-shek, you can't have the Communist Party in your government. And then after that, the KMT party started trying to dismantle the Chinese Communist Army that had fought against Japan and started trying to take their guns away. And Mao said, look, you've already told us we're not allowed to be part of the government, and now you're trying to take our guns away. Are you going to kill us all or whatever? So they had the Chinese Civil War. But the communists didn't want to take power in these countries violently. And that's what needs to be remembered. They wanted a peaceful transition. In China, they tried to peacefully join the government after World War II, and the USA wouldn't allow it. In South Korea, they wanted to have elections for all of the Korean Peninsula, and the USA wouldn't allow it. And in Eastern Europe, they formed these coalition governments of anti-fascist forces. They didn't want any Nazis to be part of the governments in Eastern Europe, but the United States wasn't willing to cooperate with them and was kind of absorbing all these ex-fascists and Nazis. So the idea that these communists were violent and they were just trying to spread communism through violence around the world, that doesn't match the reality of what happened. NATO was formed to prevent democracy. NATO was formed to prevent the democratic rights. People after World War II in many different countries wanted to vote for the communists because they were so admired in the fight against fascism. NATO was formed basically to prevent people from exercising that right. I know that's a lot of obscure history. I apologize for going on so long, but there you go.
No, very educational. So I have to ask, what do you think at this point could be the best outcome for this situation?
My hope is that that what will happen is that Ukraine and their leaders will say, all right, we want this to stop. We're going to leave Lugansk and Donetsk alone, and we're not going to join NATO, and we're not going to have weapons piled up on our border. And Russia will say, okay, that's fine, and they will pull their forces out, and Russia will pull their forces out, and the Ukrainian government will agree to Russia's terms, and will be left intact. And that would be the ideal situation here. And that's what Russia wants. Again, Russia is not trying to occupy Ukraine. Russia is not, their goal here is not to like take over Ukraine and bring it into Russia. This is not really an invasion. Okay. If you want to get technical, there are different definitions of the word invasion. Okay. Invasion, like a home invasion. If someone comes into your house and you didn't tell them to be there, well, that's technically your home invaded. So if you want to use that definition, it might be. But invasion, generally, the definition includes an intent to take over or occupy or seize territory. Russia's not doing that. They have no intention of absorbing Ukraine into Russia or forcing Ukraine to become part of Russia. They don't even want to have their forces there. They want their forces to leave. But they have made, very, very clear that the shelling of the people in the eastern regions must stop. And they've made very, very clear on top of that, that in addition to that, that they do not want this virulent anti-Russian government to continue to, stockpile U.S.-made weapons and talk of joining NATO and talk of getting nuclear weapons. And they are making the point. They are sending their forces in to take the Ukrainian military apart. And, a lot of these reports, they just get repeated as facts. I saw in that Young Turks clip that you were showing earlier, they were saying, oh, it's a fact that Russia is targeting civilians. No, that is not a fact. That is not a fact. A lot of videos have been debunked and shown to be not of Ukraine. But what is, being shown is that in a lot of these areas, Russia is actually, people are kind of blown away by the precision through which they are only hitting military targets. There are people that I talk to in Ukraine that are part of my organization, and they've talked about how they're kind of blown away by how, Russia, yes, there's somebody whose family is from Ukraine, and he's on the phone with his family every night talking to them. And they talked about how, Russia made a point of, they did strike the town that his relatives live in, but the only thing they hit was a tractor factory. And the reason they hit that tractor factory is because that tractor factory makes tanks for the Ukrainian military. And they did not hit a single other target in the town. And the precision with which Russia is striking and breaking apart the Ukrainian military is quite effective. And we're just hearing all kinds of inaccurate information. All these stories have been debunked. You showed the Snake Island thing. That's been debunked. And, there's so many of these stories out there. I mean, there was the famous Palestinian girl who held up her fist at an Israeli soldier. I've seen that circulating throughout the internet, and they're saying that's a Ukrainian girl saying it to a Russian. I mean, this is so ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. So much fake news out there, So, and then at the same time, there's all this fake news out there being spread. At the same time they're spreading all this fake news, they are trying to actively prevent you from hearing the other side by shutting down RT and banning RT from social media outlets.
Yep.
And so, if they're trying to shut up one side and you've caught them lying to you over and over and over again, at that point, you can't believe them. And if you knew somebody who lied to you once, lied to you twice, lied to you again, lied to you again, lied to you again, and then on top of that, there was somebody else who disagreed with them and they were always trying to prevent that person from speaking, you might think that's not the most honest person. Now, wouldn't you? That's what we should be thinking about mainstream media right now.
Good points. Good points. Thank you, Brothwaite, for the super chat. Thanks, America. Manhandling of this huge mess. Ukrainian neo-Nazis are now pouring into Romania and Poland and other European states. Further destabilization will happen. Another U.S. screw up. Thank you so much for that. And thank you for this one, Working Man. Thank you, Sabs, for talking about Russia. And thank you for inviting Caleb Maupin. Thank you both for that. And thank you, Tusker. Is Putin attempting to force a recognition of a multipolar world? And is it also an attempt to break US dollar hegemony? Good question.
Well, I mean, I think a multipolar world is inevitable at this point. The United States and Western Europe are not going to be able to keep dominating the world as they have, right? I mean, what started in the 20th century with the Russian Revolution and the Chinese Revolution is continuing. Eurasia, Russia and China have grown and gotten stronger. And other countries around the world are getting stronger. And the world is not going to stay centered around Europe forever. That's just a fact. I mean, one of the worst things about this is, and I've seen this, and Many times, US media voices have slipped and said things like, wow, this is happening in a European country. This is happening in a civilized country. Oh, this is happening in these refugees aren't like the ones from Syria and Libya. No, this is in a civilized. I mean, they're blatantly being racist here, right? You know, this doesn't happen to white people. This doesn't happen to Europeans. They're saying this. I mean, there's clips of this where they're just blatantly you know, being racist, but it's based on this assumption that Europe and the United States will stay at the top of the world, and the rest of the world is going to stay, you know, poor and under their boot heels for the rest of time immemorial. And that's not going to happen. I mean, the world is changing. What started in the 20th century is continuing, and multipolarity is a reality. And I don't think this is an attempt to force multipolarity. I think it's an attempt to draw a line in the sand. And I also think as far as US dollar hegemony, right? I mean, the US dollar is, you know, the top currency. It's widely used all over the planet. That's not always going to be the case. And the more sanctions the United States puts on countries, the more other currencies are going to advance. And that's just a reality of the situation. The value of your currency tends to increase the more countries that use it. The US dollar, and specifically the petrodollar, has been a big, you know, reason that the United States has stayed on top. But that's rapidly changing, I would say.
One of the things I noticed too, I was watching the State of the Union address last night, and it was interesting to me, all of the people that were willing to stand up for Ukraine, and they said, we have to protect the Ukrainian people. We should let them come into the United States. A lot of support for them, but no mention of people in Somalia or Yemen, and Biden had just bombed Somalia again last week. Mainstream media is not really talking about it, and it's really disturbing to me, and it really does feel racist to me. It's like their focus is on, let's help the European people and let's just forget about, you know, the brown people in Somalia and Yemen.
Well, sure. And there's reports about, you know, there have been attacks on Chinese people living in Ukraine because China is perceived as being aligned with Russia. I mean, China hasn't fully, you know, aligned with Russia here. They've said that they blame the United States overall for the crisis, but, you know, I mean, they're trying to be pretty neutral. But, you know, that in Ukraine, we're seeing Ukrainians are targeting, you know, Chinese people who live in Ukraine with hate crimes. We've also seen that I know at the border, you know, there has been harassment of African folks that are leaving Ukraine and such. And so, you know, there is examples of this happening. And I mean, look, I mean, this Ukrainian far right, this Azov battalion that mainstream media is now just trivializing, laughing off, saying it's not a big deal. They're vicious folks, and they're not very nice. And, you know, my good friend Alex Rubinstein, he pointed out that many people don't realize this, but in Lviv, in the Ukrainian city of Lviv, there is an entire restaurant themed around anti-Semitism and hating Jews. Right? I mean, an entire restaurant that is set up to push anti-Semitism, where they have menus without prices on them, and they have like waiters who dress in like Orthodox Jewish costumes, and you have to haggle with them for your food. And it's one of the most disgusting racist things. And it's actually built on the ruins of a synagogue that was destroyed in the 16th century. And it's really offensive. I mean, these people tear down World War II memorials. I mean, they are having torch-lit marches in support of Stepan Bandera. In 2014, when these forces overthrew the government in Kiev, one of the first things they did when they took the government building, like the equivalent of the Capitol building in Kiev, they actually unfurled, I kid you not, the Confederate flag from the United States. And just to make a statement, just to say, you know, just to make a statement to racists in the United States that we're with you, we're part of the same thing, they unfurled the American Confederate flag in the Ukrainian Capitol building. So, you know, the fact that they laugh this off and they say it's not a big deal, it is a big deal. And when these forces have been absorbed into the official Ukrainian government, this is a big deal. And it's particularly disturbing to see the left, right? TYT, the bread tube types, who have been calling everybody a Nazi for the past 5 or 6 years. You're a Nazi, I'm a Nazi, everyone's a Nazi. Oh, you don't want to vote for Biden, you're a Nazi. Oh, everyone's a Nazi. And now there's actual Nazis being armed by the United States, and that's fine. And they're okay with that. And if that doesn't reveal these people to be the biggest bunch of hypocrites in the world, I don't know what does.
Well said. Thanks for the super chat, Empire Forever. Good show tonight, Sabby. I had a mod on another lefty show threatened to block me for bringing up the Azov battalion on a live stream, calling it Russian propaganda. These are scary times. I agree. And thank you for this one, Chase. Caleb, is the U.S. putting Russia in a trap?
Well, I mean, that is a strategy the United States has long used. Zbigniew Brzezinski, he talked about the Afghan trap, where he put the Soviet Union into a situation where they felt they had to intervene in Afghanistan, and that hurt the Soviet Union. And I think that may have been the intent here, to just, work on Russia for so long that they felt they had no choice but to intervene now in Ukraine. And now with the calls that we're hearing at this point, where they're calling for international volunteers and all of that, it seems like the intent of the United States is going to be to try to prolong this war. And that will hurt Russia in the long term, right? Right now, Russia's military is very, very effective. But if Russia ends up having to remain in the country for a very long time, that could take a very significant toll on the country. And my hope is that Russian troops can leave as soon as possible, that they can get the security guarantees they need, and that they can withdraw. The people in the eastern regions can get their independence and their safety. And I think it would be in the best interest of everyone if the Russian troops were able to leave as soon as possible. That is what Russia wants pretty clearly. Russia doesn't want to occupy Ukraine, and they know that is a trap. And what scares me, what terrifies me, is seeing that appears to be what the United States is aiming to do. And one thing I want to add, in addition to this call for international volunteers, there's a whole lot of Ukraine grifting going on the internet right now. A whole lot of people are saying, oh, send your money here to help Ukraine. I would urge people, look, I want to help the people of Ukraine as much as you do, right? We all see what's happening there. It's very bad. A lot of people are suffering. But how much of this money is actually going to go to help the people of Ukraine, right? I mean, a lot of it might just go to buy a new yacht or a new boat or a new, mansion for some pro-NATO Ukrainian oligarchs. And some of it might even go to buy guns for that Nazi Azov battalion. We really don't know. And that, the fact that so much money, the fact that the Ukrainian government, the actual government of Ukraine, set up a Patreon. Okay.
Yep.
That's a little bit, that makes me feel like not only is the United States, engaging in this geopolitical maneuver and all of that, but it also makes me feel like that there's some cynical money grabs going on. And I really hope people don't fall for that.
Agreed. Amazon has gotten in on this as well, which is pretty sad. Pretty sad. Well, Caleb, thanks so much for coming on and educating all of us. You're always welcome back.
Sure. I always love coming on. You have a great program here. You do great stuff. And my best wishes to you in your work. And, we need Medicare for all, schools for all, jobs for all. Thanks for having me on.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. I'll take those comments from Roger Meadows, Eric, and then we'll head on out. Thanks so much, Roger. Sab, I know this is frustrating to see this because you feel the misleading they're doing, unfortunately, but fortunately, this is the price we pay for a democratized free media where you fear they will lead viewers astray. You have to place your trust in the viewers by making your argument and have faith in your ability to articulate it with force and confidence, aligned with the facts. Of course, people will come around. Well said. A great Wizard of Id comic strip for you youngsters has the king being informed that his policies are unpopular and the people want this and that. And given the polling results, should the king change policies and give the people what they want? And the king says, no, fire the pollsters and hire new ones. Oh, that was for Aram. Thank you so much, Aram, for that tip on Rockfin. I always want to say super chat, even when it's Rockfin. Thanks so much for this tip, Roger. I was on a Zoom call Monday put on by New York Pan, NY Pan. Chuck came after the New York State Comptroller to get our endorsement. He read out his accomplishments as Senate Majority Leader. He took questions. First thing someone asked me was, let's cut through the chase. We need you to get behind and help us pass New York Health Act. Will you get Hochul on board? Sab, I never saw so much deflection to my face as he dodged the duty out of the question. I swear the man looked like he had a conniption fit, as if something short-circuited his brain. You didn't have an answer for that. You didn't think we were going to ask you. No answer prepared. He started talking about strengthening ACA, blah, 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 and he supports all approaches. The chat blew the 6th letter of the alphabet up. Everyone got pissed. Then it was my turn. I didn't yell, but I was very direct at getting my point across. I asked Joe and the EOs. So he did say that Joe can issue an executive order for Medicare for all, but Congress still has to appropriate the money and we have to figure out how we can fund it. Well, that goes back to MMT. He can easily mint a coin, but I'll keep going here with the message. I said, Senator, Congress has the coinage power vested in it by the Constitution. No one taxes has to get touched. He yesed and agreed me to death. So you guys heard this? That's coming from Chuck Schumer. That's who Roger Meadows met with recently on a Zoom call. So you see, they know that they can do these things. I forgot to say to him, Treasury Secretary has the same power as well. The only reason why he was here is because this is an election year for him and no one has to put up with the primary challenger against him yet. He didn't answer my question about EOs for cannabis off Schedule 1 lists. Have Medicare lower drug prices. He mentioned Joe can relieve student loan debt, but he would need our help on that. That's when I yelled and said, oh, this should be funny. Then help us on getting the New York Health Act passed. Everyone gave me a thank you, laughed for saying what they really wanted to say. Like Chuck is BSing. He wouldn't shut the sixth letter of the alphabet up on SCOTUS and first Black woman nominee, of course, virtue signaling. There was one brother on there who was yahooing about it. Someone mentioned to him, her being a public defender is what's more important. Chuck said we need more of them. I yelled out, we need more labor lawyers, environmental justice lawyers, consumer protection lawyers in the judicial branch, as well as prosecutors who will spend more time prosecuting white collar crime on Wall Street and corporate America. Senator. He said he got U.S. attorneys and stuff like that in New York. I said, that's fine, but we need them as judges. He started calling my name Roger, making promises. Didn't get a chance to go in on each of his so-called accomplishments. Would have said that bipartisan infrastructure plan allowing for privatization of our infrastructure to transform it into a game of Monopoly. He mentioned a whole slate of progressive judges. We are ready to confirm. I really wanted to ask what his definition of progressive is. August 2018, you helped Mitch fast track 30 of Trump's judicial nominees. Well said, Roger. I don't have children, but why in the world would you let the child tax credit expire on an election year where the party in powder always flips after a new president is elected? Would it not have been wiser to make it permanent? I was just getting warmed up and ready to go all in, but the host was like, Roger, other people got to ask questions too. The senator's not here for very long. I was like, okay. That, Sabby, is what you call making up for lost time when I missed the interview with Governor Hochul. And from what I found out, no one really challenged her, but didn't buy her BS either. However, mark my words, eventually, everyone will come to see things my way, which is to accept that the feds won't do a GD thing. The fight is in the states, more particularly in the ballot initiative states. For the first 8 states to legalize weed, did it by a ballot initiative. Yep, I was one of those states. Washington, Colorado, Arkansas, Oregon, California, Massachusetts, Nevada, Maine. Then it was the non-ballot initiative states. The fight begins with you guys. Almost every single YouTube host outside of the Vanguard, Cedar, and Breaking Points, Caleb and Kyle live in ballot initiative states. Vanguard's in Missouri, so I think Vanguard's in a ballot initiative state. They're Missouri. It's in your hands. Speaking of Kyle, hey, Kalinsky, you are a constituent of New York State Senator Majority Leader Andrea Stewart Cousins, who refuses to bring the New York Health Act to the floor for a vote despite it having enough co-sponsors to pass. Get to calling. Stop worrying about what you can't control in the federal government. Joe's not going to do a GD thing. Matter of fact, Sab, for all of your New York viewers, Twitter storm the duty out of Kyle so he can call and do segments on her. Even more, if any of your New York viewers live in Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart Cousins' district up there in Westchester County, be it Greenboro, Scarsdale, Yonkers, White Plains, and New Rochelle, call her. Show up at her district office. Call her district office, 914 423-4031. Call her. You guys hearing this? Albany office 518-455-2585 or 2715. She even has an office outside of her district in Manhattan at 212-298-5585. Show her you mean business. This is what I mean. Just because just because you're Black and a woman doesn't mean you're going to look out for the community at which you came from. Well said, Roger Meadows. So Roger Meadows got the chance to talk to Chuck Schumer, and I think Chuck Schumer got an earful there, which he needed to hear. But Roger Meadows is 100% right. I'm actually going to be working with Kira from Hardlands Media to do a ballot initiatives panels. Now that I'm done with the Women's Summit, that's going to be our next step, to teach people how you can get that done in your state if you live in a ballot initiative state. And even if you don't live in a ballot initiative state, you still need to pay attention to this too, because this is how you put pressure on the other states that are not BI states to also pass these same laws. That's how we did it here in Massachusetts. Ballot initiative state, that's how we legalized marijuana. And then that put pressure on the states around us to do the same thing. It works. And I think when we start focusing more on the state level and not so much on the federal level, I think then we have more of a chance of getting things done. All right, honey buns. Oh, what was up? Can you do an MMT panel? I mentioned that to someone about a week or two ago. That can happen. That may be tricky just because of their schedules. But that is something that has been mentioned. But guys, it is 10:11. Yes, it is 10:11 p.m. Do you know where your kids are? Just kidding. That used to be a commercial when I was a kid. I gotta head out, you guys. It's been a great time. Thanks for all of you hanging out. Oh, wow, we have a lot of people watching. But tomorrow is Thursday. That's Roundtable, so I won't be here. I'll be on Revolutionary Blackout Network, so join me there. I'll be back here on Friday. Guys, I hope you learned a lot tonight. Caleb knows a lot when it comes to these issues. And so hopefully this was educational for you. So pass that on to your friends. Pass that knowledge on to your friends, your family members, because a lot of the things that he said here tonight, people aren't talking about. They're not talking about it. All right, guys. Have a good night. Keep up the fight.